Between 264 and 146 BC, a great series of conflicts was fought between the two commanding powers of the known world at the time, Rome and Carthage. These were known as the Punic Wars. There were three of them, and the first Punic War was basically mainly fought on the Isle of Sicily and in the waters surrounding Sicily. There were a lot of big naval battles and a lot of losses on both sides. Now, the second Punic War, that saw the emergence of the now legendary general Hannibal, who led the Carthaginian army and a few elephants as well through the Alps to invade northern Italy and down into the mainland. It was a titanic struggle between two very strong sides, and it is now regarded as one of the most infamous wars in all of human history. And then the third Punic War was basically Rome administering the final blow. They contrived a reason to invade Carthaginian territory, they laid siege to the city of Carthage itself, and eventually they broke through and destroyed the city and most of the population, and basically put the Carthaginian Empire out of existence. But it's that second war, the second Punic War of the three, that people most remember today for all of its amazing feats. You know, Hannibal crossing the Alps with those elephants in tow. It's remembered for fighting breaking out all across the Mediterranean Sea, not only in mainland Italy, but also in the Iberian Peninsula or modern-day Spain, also on the Isles of Sicily and Sardinia, and even in Carthage's home territory itself of northern Africa. And if we can learn anything from the Punic Wars, I think it's this: the second installment of a trilogy is always the most fascinating. And in the words of the great Hannibal himself in that second Punic War, "I'ma do things my way, it's my way or the highway." Let's talk about WrestleMania X-Seven. Now, I don't know if you caught it there, it was a little bit subtle, it may have gone over your head, but I was actually referring to the Rock-Austin trilogy of WrestleMania matches, the second of which obviously fell at WrestleMania X-Seven, widely regarded as one of the best, if not the best, WrestleManias of all time. So that brings us nicely onto our first point about why it's one of the greatest of all time: its star power. Now, other WrestleManias may push WrestleMania X-Seven. I'm going to probably just call it 17 from now on because X-7's a stupid name. Other WrestleManias probably do push 17 in terms of sheer star power. It might not be the most stacked card in WrestleMania history. After all, just 1 year later, you've got WrestleMania 18, which features most of the big names we see at 17, but with the addition of the invading WCW forces. Once that angle had petered out, you've got the likes of, for example, Hogan, the NWO, you've got Booker T and RVD floating around on the scene. That card is every bit as star-studded as the previous one, if not maybe more so. You've also got WrestleMania 20 with the likes of Goldberg and Brock Lesnar involved. You've got the likes of WrestleMania 29 with big matches like Rock vs. Cena 2, you've got Brock Lesnar versus Triple H, and you've got The Undertaker versus CM Punk. So WrestleMania 17 is not by any stretch of the imagination far and away the grandest star-studded spectacle in WrestleMania history. There were a lot of S's there, it was a bit of a tongue twister. But 17 has a crucial advantage, and that is basically a lot of these big stars were somewhere near their very peak at the time. Now, I'm not necessarily talking about athletic peak or in the prime of their youth or anything. Steve Austin's body had certainly seen better days in the past, and he'd since been riddled with injuries here and there, but he was the company's hottest star in its hottest period. He had taken most of 2000 off with injury, and his opponent, The Rock, had stepped in to really fill that power vacuum at the top of the card, and in doing so, The Rock had become a generational babyface, such an amazing talent, and what a dynamic you've got there as the headline match of the show. And this sense of sheer star power is present all the way through the card. In the sort of semi-main or the secondary main event, you've got Triple H versus The Undertaker. Triple H just 1 year removed from 2000, which is possibly his greatest year ever in his entire career, taking on The Undertaker, American Badass version of The Undertaker, yeah, but still The Undertaker. The card also features one of those legendary TLC ladder matches featuring three absolutely iconic tag teams in the form of Edge and Christian, the Hardys, and the Dudley Boys. And even back then, they were incredibly popular. It's not as if they've since been appreciated over time like a fine wine or anything. They were exploding and bursting apart the tag division at its seams even then. What else have you got? I mean, you've got Vince versus Shane. And look, it might not be the most popular thing to say, but I mean, the McMahons are stars, aren't they? You might not like it, I might not particularly like it at times, but the McMahons draw a crowd. Now, women's wrestling, of course, was incredibly underrepresented at the time, but at least 2001's WrestleMania had one of the biggest stars in women's wrestling ever, China, and moreover, she was actually in a title match against Ivory. She wasn't in some sort of gravy pudding, lingerie, dodgeball, Playboy, pillow fight, street fight, Playboy, gravy bowl match, which was often the case at the time. Moving further down the card, the names just keep on coming. You've got, I mean, a ludicrously deep roster of talent. You've got relative newcomers who had really hit the ground running in the past 2 years or so, Kurt Angle and Chris Jericho. Looking elsewhere at the card, you've got Kane, you've got the APA, you've got Raven, you've got Big Show, you've got Eddie Guerrero. It goes on and on and on. This WrestleMania was not just packed with stars, but packed with stars who were white hot at the time. Now, obviously, all of that is said with the benefit of hindsight. We know who's gone on to do great things. We know who is now considered among the legends of the business and that sort of thing. But the difference isn't as big as you might imagine. Back then, these names were as popular, if not probably more so, than they are now. And the reason for that is, of course, because wrestling was the thing. It was the industry boom. And so with that, the state of the business in the early 2000s brings us onto our second point, momentum. That's another key reason why this show was so amazing. WrestleMania 17 was the peak and the culmination of a lot of different factors going on around this sort of time. Chief among them, of course, being the industry boom, the fact that wrestling was very much in the center of the zeitgeist. Everybody knew about wrestling, everybody talked about wrestling, everybody was into pro wrestling. Certainly way more people than we see these days. Wrestling was a mainstream thing, and it had been for a few years by this point, but it wasn't just a one-way street. It wasn't just WWE benefiting from the wrestling boom and using that to make themselves incredibly rich and successful. No, WWE were giving back the other way. They were pushing the industry along, extending this boom period and making it bigger and grander with not only that incredible roster that we've already taken a look at, but with some amazing matches and booking and storytelling, all building up to this point. For context, the company were just coming off the back of an incredibly successful year in 2000, a year in which they'd lost their biggest star, Steve Austin, to injury for most of the year, but despite that, had actually thrived in his absence. There were so many things going on in the year 2000 that were absolutely crucial and amazing and exciting at the time. You had The Rock growing into this amazing babyface who would obviously go on to become one of the most famous men in the world off the back of his wrestling success. You had Triple H ascending to his status as the top heel in the company. You had the tag division blowing up because of those three teams I mentioned earlier. You also had the Radicals jumping over from WCW, and also my boy Steve Blackman was popping off in the hardcore division. I had to slip my boy Steve Blackman in there somewhere, you know it's true. But basically, WWE were riding a huge surge of momentum heading into 2001 and the road to WrestleMania 17. In fact, the year 2000 and the beginning of 2001 could essentially be seen as a victory lap. The Monday Night Wars were effectively over, WCW was too far behind and would shortly be going out of business. WWE had won and were now reaping the rewards of a monopoly over Western wrestling. They'd put in all the hard work in the late 90s and thrived, and now this was kind of their celebration, their huge grand display. We are the best, we are the biggest, and this is the sort of thing we can do. And off the back of that momentum, heading into 2001, everything just continued. We had an amazing show, the 2001 Royal Rumble pay-per-view, which featured an incredible title match between Kurt Angle and Triple H, an incredible ladder match between Chris Jericho and Chris Benoit, and one of the best Royal Rumbles, if not the best Royal Rumble of all time, many people's favourite by far. Now, obviously, Steve Austin won that Royal Rumble, despite a record-breaking performance from Kane, by the way, but Austin won the match, setting himself up for a title shot at WrestleMania. But the champion at the time was Kurt Angle, who had defeated Triple H to keep a hold of that belt. Now, Angle versus Austin is a great matchup. That will be proven later on in the year 2001 when they feuded. But at the time, was it the biggest main event WWE could have possibly created with their roster? Not quite. That all got fixed at No Way Out 2001, and take note of that. Only one show in between the Rumble and Mania. It worked, WWE. It worked back then. Why have you changed it? Anyway, The Rock beat Kurt Angle at that show, becoming the WWE or F champion at the time, and setting up this amazing dream main event for WrestleMania. The Rock, Austin, the two biggest names in the business by far, going head to head for the top prize. And No Way Out generally continued WWE's amazing form at this time as well, because you had Triple H versus Austin in an epic 3 stages of hell match, which I maintain Austin should still have won. He was about to main event WrestleMania. What were you thinking, Triple H, trying to win that match and doing so? I don't know. You also had Trish Stratus versus Stephanie McMahon in, honestly, in my opinion, one of the most underrated wrestling matches of all time. I'm not joking. If you've not seen it, watch it now. It's superb. They beat the hell out of each other. What I'm trying to get at here is that all this momentum put WrestleMania 17 in a very good position. Everything was bubbling away very nicely, especially when you throw in the fact quite late on that WCW had gone out of business and had been purchased by Shane McMahon, which added a new wrinkle to the Shane versus Vince feud. And thankfully, WWE decided that's pretty much all we need of WCW at the moment. We don't need WrestleMania 17 to feature the invasion early on or anything like that. I don't know whether that was a deliberate decision, whether they were still in the process of sorting out contracts and stuff. I'm not quite certain, but let's just all be very thankful that it turned out this way, because had WCW gone under a few months earlier, we could be remembering WrestleMania 17 as the invasion WrestleMania, and I suspect that wouldn't be remembered quite as fondly. Now on to the show itself, WrestleMania 17 as a wrestling show. And I'll get this point out of the way straight away. Many WrestleManias can stake a claim to being the greatest work rate WrestleMania of all time. You've got WrestleMania 10, you've got WrestleMania 19, maybe even 24. There's a few very strong candidates in there. And honestly, I'm not 100% certain that WrestleMania 17 is fully one of them. I mean, oh my word, there are some amazing matches at WrestleMania 17, but there's a lot of messiness as well. And that brings us on to our third point about why it's such a great show, because it actually worked to its advantage. Its ragged, chaotic nature really does add something to the show. And that's exactly what point number 3 is, the chaotic atmosphere. Nobody wanted WrestleMania 17 to be Wrestle Kingdom, did they? I mean, Wrestle Kingdom didn't exist as a concept at the time, but what I'm saying is nobody would have wanted WrestleMania 17 to be full of pure, intricate technical wrestling from start to finish. We might have wanted a little bit of that, and we got it in the form of Angle versus Benoit, a very good technical match in the middle of the card, but at the same time, this was still the Attitude Era. We wanted a bit of grit, we wanted a bit of chaos, and that's exactly what we got. I mean, where could I begin but by talking about Kane versus Raven versus Big Show for the hardcore title in that weird backstage brawl that spilled everywhere in the arena and featured a lot of everything all at once. I mean, what an absolute state this match is, in the best possible way though. They crash through walls, they're riding about on golf carts trying to knock each other down. Raven, I believe, at one point, I think you can hear Raven tell this story, or somebody certainly has in a shoot interview somewhere. He's about to run over a power cable at one stage, and if he'd broken it, it would possibly have knocked out the power to all of WrestleMania 17. The arena would have been plunged into darkness. I think that really sums up what this match was. It was never going to be a 5-star classic, was it? But it's still incredibly fun. And then you take that sense of chaotic energy and you ramp it up even more, and you've got TLC. Often over the years since I've been working in this job, I've heard the question posed a lot. Sometimes to myself, sometimes I've seen it between people online and everything. If you had to show a non-wrestling fan friend one wrestling match to convince them why you're a wrestling fan and why it's so brilliant, which one match would you choose? And this TLC match is the answer I've heard given more than any other match. So you've got all the chaos in terms of weapons and tables and high spots and all that sort of thing. Then you've got a very different type of chaos when we get to Vince versus Shane. And this is just pure Jerry Springer. It's a very dramatic match. It's a father and son beating each other up, and the father happens to run the whole company. I mean, what more could you ask for? But everybody, of course, remembers that one moment, one of the biggest pops of the night, maybe one of the biggest pops in all of WrestleMania history, Linda McMahon standing up from her chair and booting Vince in his genetic jackhammers. Wait, is Vince is he the jackhammer? Are his body parts the jackhammers? Are these grapefruits? I need to get my Vince McMahon glossary out and try and find out what's going on. People still talk about this moment every time WrestleMania season comes around. Kenny McIntosh of Inside the Ropes tweeted about it just the other day. He loves that moment. It makes him happier than anything else I've ever seen. And again, out of those 3 matches that I've cited as an example of the chaotic atmosphere of WrestleMania 17, only one of them is generally considered to be actually a good match, the TLC match, of course. But all of them add to the show in their own way. And the absolute destruction and drama that these matches provide are such a key ingredient of WrestleMania 17, no matter how senseless and silly they may seem a few years down the line. It's still an absolute blast to watch, isn't it? A few years down the line. 20 years down the line, Jack, what are you talking about? But obviously the card cannot be entirely junk food matches, can it? There needs to be some big performances in there. And that's point number 4. big performances. And obviously I'm talking about two big performances in particular, but that's not the only match we're going to talk about here. We'll get to that in just a second, and oh boy do I want to talk about it, but there's a little bit more to address beforehand. Because that match is not the only great match on this card. I've already mentioned Angle versus Benoit. I've already mentioned the TLC match as well. You've got Undertaker versus Triple H, which I think is a very underrated match. It's just since been overshadowed, of course, by other great matches in both men's careers, specifically The Undertaker and the later matches of his incredible streak. And it's also overshadowed, obviously, by the main event. So we'll get on to that now. The Rock versus Austin, Part 2. It's one of my favourite matches of all time, and I suspect that might be the same for a lot of people. And of course, being the second match in the trilogy, it had to have a bit of a different theme to the first one. The first match took place in the main event of WrestleMania 15 and was a pretty straightforward face-heel thing, with Austin getting the big crowd-pleasing victory. Fast forward a few years, you've now got Rock Austin 2, and they're both baby faces. And not just that, they're both mega stars, except we're in Texas, so Austin's maybe like a little bit more of a star than The Rock at this moment in time. To me, this match is a perfect example of how good wrestling doesn't necessarily mean submissions, grappling exchanges, technical working on the mat, and reversals and counters and roll-ups. No, a good match can also be in this form. And Austin and The Rock beat the hell out of each other in this bout. And just as crucial as beating the hell out of each other is the way they sell for each other. They sell their asses off for each other in this match. The Rock obviously can sell with the best of them. We know that about The Rock already because it sets up his amazing comebacks. And The Rock has one of the most electrifying comebacks in all of wrestling history, so he has to be able to sell well. But watch Austin selling in this match. Austin sells incredibly, and we don't typically associate Austin with selling at first glance because he's known as a badass, he's an ass kicker, he's the guy who's always laying in the punishment. But when he's on the receiving end, his wrestling ability and his psychology and knowing what to do with his body and the selling of pain, that all comes through amazingly. And we also get all of these amazing storyline beats as the match goes on, and these little bumps in the road really help the theme of the match to come through. And I believe the theme of the match to be desperation. It's spelled out for us in that legendary Limp Bizkit My Way hype package where Austin says to The Rock, "I need to beat you, Rock. I need this." And they will do anything to beat each other. That's very much clear in their actions as the match goes on, these storyline beats, as I've mentioned. So you've got Austin using the ring bell. You've got The Rock using Austin's finisher against him. You've got Austin using his old submission move, the $1 Million Dream, back when he was a mid-card heel, when he just arrived in the company. He's digging deep, and so is The Rock, but one of them is going to want it more. And it turns out to be Austin who does want it more and will do anything to win. It just turns out that anything is something that nobody could have suspected, aligning with his most hated foe, Vince McMahon, and in that legendary finish, allowing Vince to help him beat The Rock and turning heel in the process. And that moment at the end, that closing moment of the show, you get Austin and Vince shaking hands, and that's the end of the Attitude Era. So now we get to our fifth and final reason why WrestleMania 17 is one of the greatest shows of all time. Its legacy. That finish still divides opinion today, but I think that most of the people who are against that finish aren't angry at the finish itself. It's an incredible bit of storytelling, it's an amazing swerve, it's a real good piece of character work. It made sense for Austin's character and the desperation he was feeling at the time and the insecurity of having this younger guy come and take his place. It all makes total sense. I think people who are against this finish are actually against the consequences of it. Because after this, everything changed. Austin's heel turn didn't really work out. Nobody was that big a fan of it. We all wanted babyface Steve Austin. It's stone cold. Then the invasion angle came. That wasn't successful either, to say the least. And then suddenly, within a matter of months following on from WrestleMania 17, you've got what was once a roster bursting with these incredibly talented storytellers and athletes and a sense of excitement and violence and unpredictability. And now you've got a bloated roster with a lot less momentum. And that oversized roster, of course, leads to the brand split. And from there, the face of WWE, the structure of the promotion as we know it, is changed forever. Amazing runs in any, industry or form of entertainment, amazing periods like the Attitude Era never last forever. That's impossible. But that doesn't make the come down any less painful when it ends. And that is part of the reason I think WrestleMania 17 is remembered so fondly. It's the last great show before everything went wrong. It's the very moment that the bubble bursts. And on the bright side, if the Attitude Era was ever going to end, it was going to do so with a bang. Would you expect anything else? Looking back over the history of WrestleMania, there have certainly been bigger WrestleMania events. There's been WrestleMania 3, 28, 29, 32. There have been bigger shows than 17. There have also been more unique shows than 17 as well. You've got WrestleMania 9 with the whole Caesar's Palace theme. You've got WrestleMania last year, 36, which was obviously the most different WrestleMania of all time and possibly ever. We're certainly never going to get, in my opinion, another WrestleMania quite like that one. There have also been better WrestleManias in terms of sheer quality in the ring. You've got WrestleMania 30 and 31, even modern ones have been right up there amongst the pantheon of amazing WrestleManias. And as I mentioned earlier, 17 isn't quite top tier, in my opinion, in terms of just proper in-ring action, but that's not the point. WrestleMania 17 might not be the biggest or the most quality-filled or the most unique WrestleMania of all time, but it's still often regarded as the greatest. It's a moment in time and it represents something to us. And we love stuff like that. And that is why I believe WrestleMania 17 is one of the greatest wrestling shows of all time. Also that Limp Bizkit hype package. Look at Limp Bizkit, look at them go. Cheeky scamps. Thank you very much for watching. I've been Jack from Cultaholic. Let me know your thoughts, of course, on WrestleMania 17 in the comment section down below. And stay safe out there, stay positive, and I'll see you very soon.